Good day. We are so pleased to have Dr. Vandana Shiva here. It's such a pleasure that we have this opportunity. Dr. Shiva is doing a small tour in Europe, and that we had the opportunity also to tap into this tour and to get you to Maastricht. So also in relation to what we are working on at the Jan van Eyck Academy, also thinking towards new kinds of thinking in ecology, food futures, new materials for artists, the positions of artists and designers within urgent times as these. And yesterday, with the results of the UK, we kind of need to talk. Where are we now? What is our position in the world at the moment? And I had the opportunity to speak a little bit with Dr. Shiva about this. And perhaps after this, we can also continue that conversation. We would like to keep it quite informal, actually. We're all here on the same basis. I will just introduce Dr. Shiva a little bit. After that, I'll give the stage to you, after which you will give us a small lecture of 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And then I'll ask just one question and then give you the stage to ask your questions. So you might want to prepare a few. Dr. Shiva, you are so much. You've done so much in so many years. You've built up quite a large spectrum of knowledge, but you've had many different kinds of, let's say, characters that you played in the world, as a politician, as an activist, as an environmentalist, which is very important for us. You've laid down the ground for many, many people, also in the environmental scene in the world. Your father was a conservator of forests, and your mom was a farmer. So you take from there. Also, it was interesting also to learn you studied physics. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit as well, because I really think that is interesting how you went from physics into ecological thinking, and after that into activism. Much of your work deals with ecology, agriculture, food, intellectual property, biodiversity, biotechnology, bioethics, genetic engineering. And you founded many different kinds of movements, of which one dealing with living resources and seeds that you are running still now. I would like to give you the stage, and after that, sit next to you, ask you one question, and then give the stage to the public. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Hashim, and thank you all for being here. Your life takes very interesting turns. So I think it must have been 9th grade when you have to choose your disciplines of specialization. And the biology lab used to have this chopping up of cockroaches. And I thought it was such a disgusting discipline. Whereas physics was so cool, but my school didn't offer physics. Well, I was in a convent where they didn't think you needed to bother with these disciplines. So I used to go off and study with a college professor in the evenings and followed my passion. In physics, Einstein had inspired me. And I do want to tell you that a very short span of my life, between my MSc honors in physics and while you're waiting to get your doctoral applications through, I actually practiced art. I made a bust of Einstein. I think I made a sculpture of the thinker, and enjoyed it thoroughly. And I had a very, very lovely teacher who passed away later. But I have a deep fondness for the creativity in art. But physics was my calling. And really, someone like Einstein inspired me, and I did particle physics. I even trained in India's nuclear establishment in the fast breeder reactor. And it was my sister who asked a simple question, so what about the radiation? I said, they don't teach us that. We learn everything about how to trigger chain reactions and the energy transitions, but we don't have a single class on radiation. So I said, this is a one-eyed science, you know. And I don't want to be one-eyed, I want to be two-eyed. I want to be three-eyed, actually. And so I went deep into quantum theory, and I had joined a PhD in India, but my guide would say, don't waste your time with these questions, just solve the equations. I said, anyone can solve equations. Yeah? I'm doing this to answer the questions that puzzle me. So I then applied to the University of Western Ontario, where the best minds of quantum theory had been attracted by a colloquium. And so that's where I went, and was required to do a master's in philosophy, and I'm grateful for that. I did that in Guelph. But before leaving for Canada, I said, let me take a trek in my favorite forests and just carry a bit of home with me. And when I went to this accessible forest from Delhi, the forest was gone and had been chopped down. It was an oak forest. It had been chopped down to grow apples. And it was a totally failed project. The apples never grew, you know. But the oak was gone. And from the oak trees used to come all the springs. We used to have 7 springs from this little mountain. And the spring was a trickle. I thought I'd have a swim, but there was water only up to my ankles. And while coming back to Delhi, waiting to catch a bus, I stopped at these lovely places that are called dhabas. They're really work of art, you know. The little sheds they build on the roadside and make you the best chai in the world. And so I wanted a chai, and I started to talk. I said, I've seen this forest beautiful, and look at what's happened. And this chaiwala says, but there's hope now. Chipko has started. Now, chipko in Hindi means to hug, yeah? And women had started spontaneously to come out in the high altitude regions to say, you can't cut these forests because you're creating landslides, you're creating floods, you're creating droughts. Villages had actually been washed off. We are going to hug the trees. You'll have to kill us before you kill the tree. Very inspired by the Gandhian tradition. So Punjab and Bhopal forced me really to understand why agriculture had gone the way it had. And I realized that the farm I grew up on with my mother, that this was not the natural evolution of agrarian societies, based on diversity, based on people, based on the original meaning of the term agriculture, the culture of the land, the care of the land. It basically was an evolution from Hitler's concentration camps and the labs of I.G. Farben. And the two people who had recognized this, one was Rachel Carson in her book, Silent Spring, where she talked about those who had got addicted to selling war chemicals, did not give up that addiction, and turned these into agri-chemicals. She focused a lot more on the pesticides. The other person was Sir Albert Howard, who was sent to India in 1905. And he decided instead to make the Indian peasant his professor. He wrote a book called The Agricultural Testament, which is called the Bible of Modern Organic Farming. And he addressed the same issue, but more from the fertilizer point of view, from the NPK mentality. And he probably woke the world up into the link between healthy soils, healthy plants, healthy people, as well as the fact that organic soils are living soils, teeming with billions of microorganisms. The violence that had been built into an agriculture that came from violence, from extermination, pushed me into seeking a nonviolent farming, you know. But the reason my sort of life seems to change direction, even though at the base of it is a deep love for nature, a deep love for knowledge, a deep love for humanity. That's what's the guiding forces. But agriculture, I realized then, is a place for very intense violence. And of course, since then, my work has taught me even more, including the fact that in 1987, I got invited to a meeting on the future technologies. At that time, there were no GMOs, there was no biotechnology. But the idea that you could splice genes had been made possible by recombinant DNA. And the old chemical industry, which was the old war chemical industry, was there at the meeting and said, for future profits, we will need to do genetic engineering, because this will allow us to patent life and patent seeds. And it's the royalties we'll collect from the farmers that will make us get returns. And they said three things at this meeting in '87. It was March in Geneva and Bojave. The first thing they said was, we are too small. These were giants like Ciba-Geigy, Sandoz, others. We're too small, we got to get bigger, we'll be 5 companies by the turn of the century. We actually now have 4. Bayer has merged with Monsanto and has bought many companies, including the plant genetic systems that evolved in the city of Ghent. All of them have been bought up. Syngenta was a merger of Ciba, Sandoz, AstraZeneca, and it has now merged with ChemChina, China's biggest chemical company. And Carbide was Carbide when the disaster of Bhopal happened. Carbide was bought by Dow, and Dow has merged with DuPont. And yesterday I was reading that DuPont now has bought water companies. Now, Monsanto had tried to get into the water economy. And someone, when you do the kind of work you do, you receive information from unknown people. And in my mailbox one was this big thing on water, Monsanto getting into water. And it opened with, the crisis of water is severe, water's polluted, water's disappearing. If we invest in water and control water, it's totally sustainable profits. So for them, sustainability of profits was sustainability. And so I immediately wrote a column about this. And what they were designing really was, like with genetic engineering, what is a Roundup Ready genetically modified seed? It's basically a seed engineered to resist Roundup so you can sell more Roundup and sell more seed. And if you see the graph of Roundup use, it is totally exploding with the explosion of Roundup Ready soya particularly, including the burning of the Amazon. And most people don't realize a simple action by Mr. Trump, where he announced he would have a trade war with China. China immediately said, we won't take your soybean. So what happened? The soya trade shifted to Brazil. And that's where the Amazon is burning. 80% of the soya that China is now getting is coming from Brazil. It's one little decision like that can burn an entire, the lungs and liver and center of biodiversity that we have. The second thing they said at this meeting was the ones who will win the race are the ones who will have the highest number of patents. So it was so clear that meeting, they were not talking about feeding the world nothing. They were talking about owning life for royalties. And my simple response then was, but you don't create life, and a patent is granted for invention. Life is not an invention. Seed is not an invention. A machine might be, but a seed is not a machine. So it's amazing how they push the language of seed as a machine. So at a time when in India we had shaped laws that said, and I had a role in this, it's Article 3J of our patent law, plants, animals, and seeds are not inventions, therefore not patentable. In America, there was a decision against a farmer who had grown soybean that he had bought, not from Monsanto, but from the market, from an elevator. And Monsanto sued him and said, but that seed is ours. He said, but I didn't buy it from you. He says, but it's a descendant of seeds we sold to another farmer. And that's not in the law, that seeds that are offspring of earlier seeds are still owned by Monsanto. They actually got a ruling from the Supreme Court saying seed is a self-replicating machine. And when a farmer grows seed on their own field, future generations being grown are the theft of this self-replicating machine. It's a case called Monsanto versus Bauman, if you need to follow up. And every time I go to the US, I say, how can you not have an uprising on this total redefinition of the world? And when people get very confused with what's genetic engineering and how do you shoot a gene and you have an antibiotic resistance marker and you have a viral promoter, and people start to get dazed, and I say, okay, you want to know what a GMO is? A GMO means God move over. We take over as creators, because to invent means to create, from scratch. The third thing they said is, it's not enough that we have the European and American market. We need the whole world. And so we are going to bring patents on seed into at that time, what was called the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT, which became the WTO in '95. I heard these three things on my flight back. I've decided I'm going to save seeds. I know nothing about how to save seeds, but I'm going to save seeds. And the thing is, when you decide what you learn how to do it. When you decide you learn how to cook, you learn how to cook. So I started seed saving. I started going to the villages of Chipko to start encouraging women to continue to save seeds. And when I say women, I say it because when I'd meet the men outside, I'd say, do you have seeds of the old millet? No, we grow soybean. I'd keep walking, get into the village, go to the women, and say, of course I do. It's what gives me strength, what gives my children strength. Because millets have about 40 to 50 times more nutrition than rice and wheat. But they were called primitive crops when the Green Revolution was being introduced. And they were called backward crops. And they were pushed out. And I say it was partly a racism, because millets make dark bread. They're dark. So when we started to save millets, which we call forgotten foods, I used to do festivals called Black is Beautiful. Because people had a bias for the white bread, for the white chapati, bias for the white sugar. And we grow natural sugar with the organic sugar cane, with white salt, made in a lab. So the seed bank started, and that's how Navdanya, the movement, grew. Navdanya means 9 seeds, but it also means the new gift. And for me, the new gift is reclaiming the commons of seed and of biodiversity and of our knowledge. Because patenting is really a monopoly and privatization of what is common knowledge. Since you don't invent a seed, when you take a patent on any seed, you've stolen from nature or farmers. And that's why I wrote a book called Biopiracy. And I fought cases of biopiracy, of the neem, of the basmati, of wheat. Our ancient wheats do not contribute to gluten allergy. And Monsanto took a patent. And we had to fight that. We found 9,000 patents on Ayurvedic plants. And now, increasingly, more and more patents on climate-resilient crops. On the GATT issue, I started to go to Geneva and talk to our ambassadors. And the other day, one of the former ambassadors met me. She says, when you used to barge into our office and tell us this is important, we thought you were exaggerating. But thank goodness you warned us. Because what India did was 2 things. We changed the text. Monsanto had put in the text of the trade-related intellectual property right, Article 27(3)(b), that seed will have to be patented. And our government put that countries can exclude patenting. The second thing was they wanted industrial breeding monopoly. And we said, but farmers breed. And so we put farmers' rights and we put a sui generis system. And those then became laws, and I helped write those laws in my country. A law on the patent exclusion, but a law on farmers' rights. Just the other day, Pepsi sued farmers. 3 farmers, potato farmers. A crore is 10 million. 10 million rupees each. Yeah? For saving potato seed. But our law says the farmer's right to save, exchange, breed, market seed cannot be taken away by any law. And we put that clause in the farmers' rights law. So the minute I saw this in a paper, I said, they're going to trash these farmers. And I contacted the lawyer, and I sent him our book. We have a new book in which I've synthesized all our work on seed and intellectual property. So far, it's only available in India. Its title is Origin, The Plunder of Nature and Knowledge. It's got all the details of all these cases. So I sent him the book, and I said, they cannot sue the farmers. And that book was presented to the judge, and Pepsi had to withdraw its case. In India, we managed this, but around the world, there is such aggression. In Europe, they had tried to introduce a law. It was called Propagation Material Law, and some parliamentarians sent to me, they said, we can't figure out if it's about seed. I said, send it to me. They sent it to me. I said, it's about seed. Because the laws so far have national registers for seed. This law would make the European Commission the one that gives permission of what seed you could grow. So I organized the Greeks. I said, you'll have to go from every remote island of yours to go to Brussels to say, may I please grow this? Every gardener will have to take permission. And we did, I did a lot of amendments, and eventually that law was sent back. And it could not be passed. But they don't give up. They've recently sued the Brazilian peasants, and because you know they have a strange president right now. Many of our countries have strange leaders. And I'll touch quickly on how we get strange leaders without taking too much time.
Get rid of them.
They've sued the Brazilian peasants $7 billion. Because the difference between corn and soya is hybrid, so you can't save it anyway. But soya is not hybrid, so you can save it. And farmers have been saving seeds, and the law of Brazil used to allow it. But they're just suing. So this then led me to the realization that basically the economy that has been created post-globalization, post-1995, post-WTO, is really an economy of speculation and an economy of rent collection. It's the end of making. Yeah? Whether it's money, the money that's being made by the billionaires in finance is purely on speculation. And I want to show you a graph, one of our recent books. You remember the 2008 collapse? After 2008, these investment firms that do the speculation, where the billionaires' money is held, have exploded. So BlackRock is actually now 7 trillion. BlackRock, yeah. And Vanguard. Yeah. And then if you look at the individual companies, I have a new book called out, Oneness versus 1%. And I was very puzzled with the buying out of Monsanto by Bayer, as well as the takeover of the Paris Summit by Bill Gates, with solutions of geoengineering and changing the planet. So my son, who's done the book with me, did very quick research. The BlackRocks and Vanguards own all the corporations, 70%. It's the investment firms. It's not small shareholders. That period of the corporation is gone. The billionaires control the corporation. And of course, for the billionaires to make money, what do they want? They want to make sure that they have more extraction. So they've got to extract the last bit of profits. And they're creating all kinds of new economies. Austerity and structural adjustment is part of that extraction. How do you extract from society? The very definition of growth is an extractivist term. During the war, the word growth was invented for economy. Earlier it used to be for living things, for babies and plants and trees. They grew. During the war, to mobilize resources for the military and armies, the definition of growth that was created was if you produce what you consume, you don't produce. So it's basically an extractivist system. Their only extraction is counted as contributing to the economy. And basically, in effect, globalization and free trade has extrapolated this to the national economy. If you are a national economy that can provide for yourself, you're not growing. It's when you sell your wheat and buy your wheat, that's when growth takes place. And I've done so many analysis and campaigns in India of how this is triggered and how we're being made dependent for things that we could provide for ourselves. And I remember there was a very little, a little county or region of Belgium that said no to the European-Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Yeah? And we will need to do this, especially after Brexit, because people thought that the Trumps and the Johnsons were anti-trade, yeah, and for the national economy. No. Therefore, the part of the economy that is fully global, and they're against the local and national economy. So the rent collection and the intensification on inputs, the fossil fuels, the chemicals, has given us the really severe ecological crisis, and it has given us the severe threat to work, employment, and our public health. So in 2009, while going to Copenhagen for the climate summit, I made a little booklet called Soil Not Oil, and it grew into this book called Soil Not Oil. And I said agriculture is being left out of its role both as a problem in industrial agriculture or as a solution as ecological agriculture. As industrial agriculture, if you take the production and the use of fossil fuels, the use of chemical fertilizers, not only is the production using fossil fuels to burn natural gas at high temperatures to fix atmospheric nitrogen, but it's a huge greenhouse gas emitter. And most people don't even talk nitrogen, but it is the big planetary boundary. So, you know, this was the planetary boundary research done by Stockholm. And the highest overshoot is species diversity and nitrogen. But those are the two aspects of climate change and planetary destruction we usually don't talk about. The nitrogen, the nitrous oxide is 300 times more damaging as a greenhouse gas. And then it's running off into the oceans and creating dead zones. The transport and long-distance shipping of everything we eat is another very big contributor. We've called it food miles. And then we've got everything in packages. It was unbelievable on the flight. You know, while coming out from the States, they offered me a bruschetta. I said, I'll have a bruschetta. You won't believe it what it was. It was a bit of factory bread, and in a container, a tomato sauce, and in another container, a cheese. I said, this is not food. And so our latest report, which is called The Future of Food, and it's available on the Navdanya International website. If you go to Navdanya International, you'll find it. I've written it because of two issues: the rush to fake food, beginning with Impossible Burger, yeah, and the rush to a fake economics, which they call zero cost, zero budget. The corporations will bear no cost. They don't want to support society, institutions like yours. No, they want everything. of all the tax money for them. And the rest is an externality. For India, we've done an assessment of the externality. It's $1.3 trillion annually of environmental damage and of social damage. We've lost 300,000 farmers to suicide. But on terms of those same toxics and those same chemicals that are causing harm to the earth and leading to the extinction of species, 80%. Insects gone. Why are insects dying? Because we created things called insecticides and pesticides. We created weedicides like Roundup. Of course species have to disappear because we've created an agriculture designed to push species to extinction. But these chemicals also have impact on our health, and I just want to rush through very quickly. Neurological diseases are costing 2.4 trillion, autism 171 billion, cancer 2.5 trillion, diabetes 2.5 trillion, endocrine disruption 549, antibiotic resistance markers, infections 1 trillion, infertility 3.6 billion, obesity 1.2 trillion, birth defects 22 billion. We are talking about a disaster. And the other connection that is so clear now is that the health of the planet and the health of people are not separable. So I've done a detailed book in India from working with Ayurveds, but internationally we've done this manifesto on food and for health, and this is also available on the Navdanya website. But to wrap up, how are these issues of the six-mast extinction, of this climate catastrophe, as well as, I would say, the catastrophe of political systems and social systems, how are they linked? I wrote a book after Seattle called Earth Democracy, because we were being accused of knowing what we are against and not knowing what we are for. I said, can't you see that our slogan is, our world is not for sale? Because we love the world. We're not going to let it be your property and commodity. We'll not let you enclose our commons that make life possible. But more recently, the oneness and the 1% has taken me further down the line of realizing that basically we have economies designed to kill. Whether it's chemical farming, which has all instruments that are designed to kill, but even the measure of growth, austerity, neoliberalism, are designed to kill. And they're designed to extract. And they're designed to deregulate. Now, all living systems are regulated. They're self-regulated. Yeah? Our body is an amazing self-organized system. Our gut microbiome, every one of those trillions of microbes in our gut is organizing themselves. Every organism in the soil is organizing themselves. They don't have an external master. But they are in mutual gifting. So the mycorrhizal fungi will bring nutrients far away to the plant that needs them. The pollinator will come to a flower and give fertility to the flower and get honey. What an amazing system of reciprocity and giving. This is the system that gets interrupted, and then everything is accumulating in the hands of the billionaires. There are 5 of them controlling half the wealth of the world right now. There used to be far more. Maybe I should just read you the trends, because most people don't realize how fast this has happened. In the introduction to this book, in 2010, there were 388 billionaires that controlled half the wealth of the world. It became 177 in 2011, 159 in 2012, 92 in 2013, 80 in 2014, 62 in 2016, 8 in 17, 5 in 2018. And who are they? The extractors of rents and the speculators. The work I've done in India is saving seeds. We've created 140 community seed banks. But because I wanted to encourage the farmers to use their seeds and build it into a production system, I then started to work with them on organic farming, to not have to use chemicals. And then they're the ones who said, but now we grow all this diversity, got to help us distribute it. And we learned how to create circular economies so that farmers would get their fair share of returns. And our farmers are earning 10 times more than the commodity growing farmers. Our work on, we said we won't measure yield of nutritionally empty commodities that go and make biofuel. We will measure nutrition per acre. And we can feed 2 times India's population if we conserve biodiversity. And part of what this work has taught me is that when you work in alignment with ecological laws and nature, you actually benefit humanity. It's when you try to extract in the name of benefiting humanity that you destroy nature, you dispossess most of humanity, and the billionaires get richer. So it's a system that is based on separation and division. And on the basis of separation and division, what has been created is, oh, I must show you this. So this group of companies, I call them the poison cartel because they make poisons, you know. They threatened a newspaper where I'd put this. And the newspaper said, oh, they're very angry. And I said, but it's literal. They make poisons and they're a cartel. They work together as a cartel. So what this system has given us is through extraction, it's created an inverted pyramid of power, the 5 sitting there, and the handful of corporations, including now the drivers of agriculture are BlackRock and Microsoft, with the digital agriculture, farming without farmers, surveillance technologies. You're basically saying the 2 groups that need surveillance, Monsanto and CIA. Monsanto has bought the world's biggest climate data corporation, the world's biggest soil data corporation. They are concentrating power in ways that there will be no freedom for people. Now, given that what it's costing us, the farmer, the eater, of course we have to break out of this. And that's where the creativity of non-cooperation for me has always been a very, very big guide. But it's not just our conditions of living. Democracy is being taken away because then the billionaires finance the elections. Yeah? So elections are now totally run on machines. You know, even Brexit was created by the same processes that helped Trump win. So you've got Facebook helping you talk to your friends, and they're picking up all the messages and doing the data mining. And then they're selling it to Cambridge Analytica. And then Cambridge Analytica, with algorithms, is analyzing trillions of messages and then turning them into hate. Of targeting, in the US, it was targeting women, blacks, Muslims, migrants. I don't know what the targets were in Brexit, but it's hate targets. And then the politicians buy this from Cambridge Analytica and others. Now, they were the first, but it's all over now. All political parties have hundreds and thousands of people mining data and sending political messages of hate. And that's the reason this hate is amplifying. It's not part of society. And that's why I come back to my learnings of potential. That we can cultivate hate and it'll spread, and we can cultivate love and it'll spread. And it depends on where we throw our energy and our weight in. And this then facilitates the 1%, because through divide and rule, they insulate themselves and keep everyone busy fighting with each other. I watch it in my country. It's unbelievable. You know, our economy is collapsing. We are the worst in hunger. Our farmers are dying. And of course, the government's very clever. They just shut down the data. Oh, you're troubled by children dying of hunger? We won't count. We won't look. We won't let you know. So we have to reclaim even more our knowledge and become knowledge sovereign. The final issue is about culture. How do we see ourselves as cultures? Will we be defined by the narratives of division and hate, or the experience of diversity and oneness? It's available to us. Those choices are available to us. And partly because, you know, I don't think life is instant coffee like Nestle. I think life is a nicely filtered coffee, you know? And it's good to not despair, because today is not good. But we can sow the seeds of hope. And I believe, you know, the work you do, those of you who are artists, economy today has been reduced to profiteering, and it's been reduced to this money machine that grinds everything down. But Aristotle had a word for this. He called it chrematistics, the art of money making. And that's done very well for the billionaires. But he had a definition of economy, or economia, the art of living. And I think the art of living is the challenge of our times. And creative ways to defend the spaces of life on Earth for other species, for other people, for future generations, because everything that takes ecological systems away from other species and leads to extinction is taking away from other people and leading to inequality and poverty, and is taking away from future generations, which is why the young ones are on the streets today. The art today is the art of living and making the possible in times of extinction. Humanity has never had this challenge, but we can see it as the biggest gift in our evolutionary history.
Thank you so much. I think we are all, and I speak for myself, humbled, inspired. And I told you I had one question to ask you, but you kind of already answered it. And I feel also, I mean, also speaking to you before, you also managed, within the whole spectrum of your life, to bring back all those issues and channel them also towards the public in a very actual and in a very important way. I would really want to know, when we speak of them, those who, let's say, have a certain world vision and also construct a kind of a world that we are now speaking of, let's say Monsanto, Bayern, the big companies, capitalism, the systems. I would really love to know, who are we? And who should we be?
Mm-hmm.
And if we would know that, what would be the next step? Would we know what we would want to become? What is that life that we aspire?
Of course, I would separate the construct of the corporation, because they're really not people. They parade as having personhood, and that's part of the recent legal decisions, again in the United States, where in the case of Citizen United, a ruling was given that corporations are person, and hijacking democracy is their freedom of speech. You know, and these aspects in India, the debate took place, is still taking place around issues of anonymous electoral bonds, where one party that rules got 95% of them. So of course they have all the money to mobilize this hate digitally. And this is why, for me, being sovereign in your mind is going to be so important. So I often see that, you know, the first colonialism was about territories that could be grabbed. And the legal jurisprudence was terra nullius, empty land. And then the whole bioimperialism of the owning the seed and genetic resources was you declare the seed as empty till you shoot a gene, you know, and you empty life of its life. And what's happening now, you know, the top 4 billionaires, the top 10 billionaires, they're in the business of basically mining our minds. We have become the contemporary raw material. Just like earlier, there were mines out there, the genes were mined from living resources, and now our mind is being mined. And therefore, defending the autonomy of our thinking, our ability to know, to create, to make, becomes the most important quality. Who are we? I think we got to overcome the separation that was constructed very artificially, that humans are separate from nature. Because it's this separation that then allowed the manipulation of human beings to originally be serfs, in an industrial machine. The interesting thing is, you remember this word sabotage? They used to put those wooden things into the machines. Sabot. Sabot, yeah. So people have always known what will harm them. But if you see today, the biggest, I see this for India, over these last few years, there's been an attack on our exchange through money, which is direct, I go and buy 4 lemons from you. I give you 10 rupees. No, they want digital transactions. Yeah. And this, in effect, destroyed 90% of India's economy. Now, even in the Arab Spring, that vendor who killed himself, burned himself, was because vegetable selling was being made illegal. So autonomous sovereign economies, self-organized economies, there's a huge assault on them. And that's why the resistance of today is for those who have the privilege to create self-organized economies. Who we are is basically reclaiming the fact that we are community. Margaret Thatcher began neoliberalism by saying there are only individuals, there is no society. Yeah? But individuals are members of society in relationship. Sometimes we can shut our relationships out of our mind, but they don't go away. If we didn't have parents who gave birth to us, we wouldn't be here. If they didn't take care of us, we wouldn't be here. If in our old age, there are not people around us. So you can either have family or social systems and public systems. But systems of relationships is what make life possible. But the most important for me is we have to reclaim and recognize that we are beings of the earth. We are earthlings. And that creates both the limits as well as the possibilities of what we can do.
I'm going to give it to you. If you can please come forward and ask a question to the microphone here. It's easier for us also in order to record it. So let's just point you. Yeah, please, come. Yeah. I mean, if you want to, you can take this one. It's easier. Yeah.
Dr. Shiva, thank you very much for coming and sharing your inspiring life stories and your insights with us. My name is Andreas Mitschke. I until recently worked as a postdoctoral fellow at Maastricht University. And about a year ago, I defended my doctoral dissertation on the public debates about the risks of genetically modified crops in India and Europe. What I found was that civil society in India can be very successful in pushing for its aims because of its volatility and at times its radicalness. My question to you is, what can civil society movements here in the West or in other parts of the world learn from civil society in India? And for that matter, if I may specify, what can we, us being activists, scientists, artists, citizens, can do on the very micro level to resist the centralization that we face and that keeps us apart? Thank you.
So actually, if you think of it, the talk on Brexit started when England was used to subvert the European biosafety regulations. Yeah? Think, we shouldn't have a European law, we should have national systems. And immediately after that, the Brexit talk started. What was Johnson's first statement? We got to liberate the GMOs. What do you liberate the GMO from? Regulation. Yeah? So I really feel this moment of the election of England has to be used to defend even more vigorously the European biosafety laws. And it should be a very, very big part of every movement. The movement of farmers doing organic, the movement of people in ethics, it has to be a very big issue. The movement of people who worry about human health, because no matter how much you have a repetition of, oh, it's safe, glyphosate is safe, the science is showing more and more. There's a paper published yesterday about how Roundup damages we have the shikimate pathway in our gut bacteria, and because its object is to destroy the shikimate pathway, it does it, and our gut bacteria die. And the gut microbiome just being destroyed is then being linked to the cancer, to the kidney failure, to the diabetes, because these are all then being triggered by this. So the links between the farmer's economy and the health of people, and between health of people and health of the planet, that is where future mobilization will need to happen. Now, the same people are already mobilizing the farmers. Yeah. So it's now turned out there's a fake farmer, Willie, who organized the protest of Berlin against bans on pesticides or reduction on pesticides. Willie is not a farmer. He's a salesman of chemicals. Yeah? And then, of course, just like Johnson and Brexit was equipped and Trump was equipped with amazing digital databases, you can bring in Netherlands huge numbers of tractors because farmers don't even know what they're going out for except that they are losing their livelihoods. Yeah? I think the figure is in Europe, 1,000 farms are going out every day, per day. Now, but we need these farms, and I think the big shift we need to make is, I mentioned that agriculture became like war, and it's leading the war against the planet, the climate havoc, the biodiversity, the sixth mass extinction, and the health, the assault on our bodies, because we are not separate from the earth. I think the biggest thing we can do is start pushing from local levels upwards. Farming that cares for the soil, for the water, for biodiversity and health of people is the equivalent of a health service, an environmental service, and we have to become very innovative in the way we get out of the old silos into new interconnectedness.
Is the challenge. Next, please. Yes.
Can I use your microphone?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So yeah, you said it, we are in a crisis of society, in a crisis of politics, and we are in the sixth mass extinction. And you say it in your book Oneness, and you also say it in the foreword of the Extinction Rebellion book that you wrote, that we have to go into rebellion against the system. And I just wanted to ask you to just tell us a little more also about our own responsibility towards our own future. I mean, it seems very worrying, all of the things that are happening right now. So I'd just like you to tell us what we can do to prevent the worst from happening.
By doing the good work at your level. So, I was absolutely chilled when I heard about these companies talking about 5 companies controlling food and health. And they do, because Bayer, as Monsanto sells the Roundup, and Bayer as Bayer sells you the cancer drug. What a brilliant business model. Yeah? They'll never run short of profits. And that's where you now need the issue of liability to be a big issue. They're fighting it very hard. Even at the climate negotiations in Madrid, they're fighting, bearing the cost. There was a principle evolved at the Earth Summit in Rio. There were 2 principles. One was the polluter must pay, and the second was precautionary. And we have to ensure that the best of things we've created as societies, they might be aggressively attacked, but we've got to find new ways to make them relevant again. And that's why art is not just about making a good painting or a good photograph. Art today is, as I said, creating the possibilities of a future. And that includes both rebellion, and rebellion is against the worldviews, because the minute you withdraw cooperation from this mechanistic worldview and the greed and extractivist worldview, all kinds of freedoms get created. Yeah? So the first rebellion is against the dominant worldview. The second rebellion is against the systems that embody that worldview. The third rebellion is against the laws that get created to criminalize your freedoms. Now, colonialism has always done that, so we know it. We know that when the British came to India, they made it illegal for peasants to grow food so they could have more indigo, because a bag of indigo used to exchange for a bag of gold. Farmers were starving, but they were getting more indigo. And it took Gandhi, on his return, to say, we will not grow indigo. And then when the British made it illegal for Indians to make salt, which we need in a tropical climate, Gandhi walked to the beach, picked up the salt, and said, we need this for our survival. We will continue to make salt. And nature gives it for free. So I took inspiration from that. And every time there are laws made to make our seed illegal, and they don't give up. We don't give up, they don't give up. But I think we are aligned with life, so we will last. And they're based on constructions, and constructions collapse. So for seed, we said, well, we have received these seeds and biodiversity from nature and our ancestors. We have a duty to hand them over in their integrity, their beauty, to future, and diversity to future generations. Therefore, we will not obey any law that interferes in our duty to nature and the future. But I think the third part of it is linked always, because I've realized in personal life as well as in my political life, you can say no, 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 no forever till you run out of breath. And the system will carry on. But the minute you create an alternative, you change the system. And that's why not only did I start saving seeds, but the context of saving seeds changed the context of agriculture. Today, our native seeds are spreading for climate resilience, salt tolerance, flood tolerance. Our organic cotton seeds that are started to spread because of the suicides of farmers in the cotton areas. The data showed last year that because of native cotton seeds coming back, Monsanto lost 11 million. So the context of doing the right thing is the biggest rebellion, actually. And that's also the reason, in a very natural way, on the farm where we have a seed bank, we grow 2,000 varieties of crops, 740 varieties of rice, 250 varieties of wheat. I learn from nature, and I hope some of you will come to learn from nature very much on its own, and Earth University as a learning center has grown. And it's really to cultivate hope and the possibility of hope. And for those who want to know details, for the literature, I was saying Navdanya International. For the Earth University, you can go to navdanya.org. Navdanya. And it's not my name. It means 9 seeds.
Yeah, shall I come to you? It's okay, I can come to you. No worries.
Getting old and clumsy.
Yeah, no problem.
So I have a bad side. I come to see you. Thank you so very much for this very beautiful example of courage and perseverance and trust in your own work. I have a tiny little thing to offer you, which is a bit old. I want to... You mentioned several elements, seed, order, self-organization, freedom, systems, and so on. And I'm curious whether you can share with us something from the roots of Indian tradition, in which they speak about ritu, rita, material and principle,
Satya, Dharma, and the entire tradition of the fragment of the Veda, which is focused on the right action, which is based on the right vision, Dharma, and how the Dharma is connected with Satya and with the connection between cosmic Dharma and the Swa Dharma, which has its root in Swa Bhava. I'm sorry for making it long. And Bhava also means seed.
So for those of you who totally, yeah.
Thank you.
So interestingly, the word Ritu is weather, climate, etc. And Rita is its roots, which means the right order. That the universe has a self-organizing order. And it took a NASA scientist to remind the contemporary world that the Earth is a self-organized living organism. And James Lovelock, and he gave her the name Gaia, the name of the Greek goddess. Because he realized that no matter what you do, she manages her temperature and her climate system. And that's why, to address the climate crisis, we have to stop thinking mechanistically about the Earth as a dead Earth, which was the assumption of dear Francis Bacon. And I want to tell you a little anecdote about him. So he thought he was so smart. He wanted to do an experiment on how much snow he could stuff into a chicken before it died. He got pneumonia and he died, which shows you how his method was so inadequate for living. So the dead Earth paradigm is so wrong. And the living self-organized Earth paradigm is necessary to wake up to and to also expand our possibilities, because when we realize that the Earth is living and self-organized, then our own possibilities get enhanced. Whereas when she's dead, the only possibility we have is of conquest. Or where the billionaires are going now, when they can't conquer here anymore, oh my God, we are going to have extinction. They agree with Extinction Rebellion on extinction. And then say, but we have an alternative of escape. So Elon Musk is talking about SpaceX, $1 billion ticket to Mars. And his idea of food, he says, I have figured out how to move a Pizza Hut to Mars. For him, in the spectrum of food, a Pizza Hut has a place on Mars. Now, if we were to take all the money they're spending on growing food on Mars and just put it on growing gardens everywhere, we would solve so many problems. So when I was starting to work with communities on climate change, couldn't go to Indian villages and say climate change. It meant nothing. So I asked them, I said, what do you think is happening with these extreme floods and these extreme droughts or the melting of glaciers? And the two phrases that came out from ordinary people, one was anritam, that wrong action has caused it, which is true, you put out too much fossil fuels, it's wrong action. But the second thing they would say was ritu asantulan, imbalance. Yeah? And so we do need to go to the deeper roots of how lasting civilizations have lasted and did not disappear and did not go extinct. On the language of dharma, so in Indian philosophy, you have 4 ends of life. Yeah? Of course, you must have pleasure, it's calm. Arth, you must have resources to live your life. Which is the third? No. Dharma is living right on this planet, and moksha is through this having liberation. Now, dharma is right action, but because we are hugely interrelated, your relationships are different from my relationships, are different from your relationships. So swadharma is your right action in the context of your relationships. And this then gets aligned to the larger dharma of the universe, which means basically aligning ourselves with the laws of nature and the laws of humanity, the laws of ecology and the laws of the universe. And the laws of the universe and humanity and ecology are, you cannot take alone. You must give. And when you give, you will receive. Now, what have I learned in these years? That when we give organic matter to the soil, food actually becomes a byproduct. We get water, we got for 0.5% organic matter, 80,000 liters. Our water levels have come up 70 feet. Our butterflies and bees are 6 times more on a farm than in the forest next door. So you get then multiple benefits. And I think the other thing we have to get out of is, besides the mechanistic idea of the dead earth and the fragmented earth, we've got to get out of the idea of linearity. Because linearity creates one-dimensionality. And the right action has multiple impacts. And you don't always have to calculate every bit of it. What you have to calculate is the right action. And it will bring you all kinds of unanticipated benefits, not just to you, but to others. And that's why the more we allow our mind to expand, and I always say the alternative to globalization is a planetary consciousness. And a planetary consciousness is not escaping to Mars and colonizing other planets. A planetary consciousness is knowing how we are on this planet, what's the planet's life and her biodiversity, and aligning ourselves with that. And that's what I said in terms of the art of living. Creating the art of living within both the potential and the limits of this life on this earth.
Thank you so much for your lecture and also for what you do. So I really appreciated what you mentioned before about extractionism, both as a philosophy and as a practice, as something that requires a reductionist underpinning to exist. And the example you gave was that of a tree that can be looked at as just a block of timber. And I totally follow you in this necessity to counter such reductionist approach in favor of a more holistic, comprehensive one. In other words, something that celebrates and embraces complexity, that in your words is also diversity, and it's also oneness. But sometimes grasping such complex can be hard, can be difficult, also because simplicity and clarity and directness are values, I think. They allow us to communicate in a more straightforward way. So my question to you is, how can we reconcile these superpositions? How can we make complexity simple and understandable without making it simplistic and without reducing it?
Complexity creates simplicity. Complexity is different from complicatedness. We are living a life of such complication that living has become impossible. You know, we weren't supposed to be short of time, but now everyone's short of time. I have lived with communities who have no money and have beautiful lives. And now no matter how much money you make, you're always desperate. So complicated systems are introduced into our life through a simplification. And in fact, the way we've been made partners of this very destructive system is through the magic of consumerism. Yeah? That instead of being makers and creators, the part of us that would consume is constantly triggered through advertising, through messaging, through pricing, through everything. And by the way, the word consumption was a bad word. Consumption meant getting tuberculosis. You remember? Middle Ages? So-and-so died of consumption? Yeah. And we are dying of consumption. We're killing the planet of consumption. If you look at agriculture, How is Roundup sold? Oh, don't do cover crops, don't do weeding. How is a pesticide sold? Just spray. How is urea sold? Just throw this white pellets. Why waste your time composting? So one of the things I've found in the early days when I used to work with training with farmers, I would take urea and I'd ask the farmers to get earthworms and sprinkle a little urea, and the poor earthworm starts to die because it's a salt. And the farmers would hold their ears. My God, that's what we're doing? We're killing life? Because one could go into the complication of what urea is and the making of urea. But this activates within the farmer the recognition that they are part of the killing. And no one wants to be part of the killing. It is the work of artists to make the complexity of self-organized systems accessible. I realize that it is in the nature of the way science has evolved. And the reason I was so inspired by Einstein, he always said, truth is simplicity. Yeah? And in ecological systems, we know that not only are systems that are in ecological balance simple, they're simple in the sense you have to do very little. You know? There was a brilliant farmer from Japan, Matsunobu Fukuoka, who wrote a book called The One-Straw Revolution. And he called his agriculture do-nothing farming. He said, you let nature work. Just facilitate nature, and then you sit back. Yeah? And that's part of what we need to get back. So simplicity in living. We have a beautiful Hindi word for it, saralta. And Gandhi said, live simply so others may simply live. And he had another very powerful summary of a very powerful Upanishad called the Isha Upanishad, in which he says, the earth has enough for everyone's needs, but not for a few people's greeds. So whether it's science or whether it's art, taking the complexity of relationships and getting the germ that holds all that, that communication really is what we all have to do, no matter how we approach it. We could do it as science, we do it as farmers, we do it as people who cook. You know, I really believe cooking is the ultimate art that's under assault, and I have been working with women of India who make the most beautiful stuff, all being made illegal by sanitary and phytosanitary laws. Yeah? You know, they cooked this up in WTO too. And who wrote it? Nestle, Pepsi, Coke. Yeah? That making by hand is dangerous to your health. The toxics in your food are brilliant. Lots of fat, lots of sugar. Yeah? That's what's going to make you healthy. And they run our health and safety standards now. You know, they're the advisors everywhere. So that's why I said, you know, we are in such absurd times that the simplicity of alternatives is so clear to see. The challenge is, because our lives have been made complicated, breaking through those webs of complication is the challenge. And the only way you overcome it is through relationship and solidarity.
So who would like, yeah? How many more questions do we have so we have an idea of what's going on? Is there one? There's two, three. Okay, can we take three more questions? Dr. Shiva?
Sure.
Yeah, is it okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Am I allowed to have two questions? Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva, for that very brilliant and insightful lecture. My name is Ibrahima, and I'm a teaching assistant at the School of Business and Economics of this university. So until recently, I was a PhD fellow at the United Nations University in the city, and the UN insists a lot on these sustainable development goals. Among them, you have goal number 8, which is economic growth, insisting for developing countries and emerging economies to have a minimum of 8% per capita GDP growth till 2030. And within the same list, you have climate actions, which somehow sound contradictory. So how do we reconcile, create a framework for sustainable development, but at the same time helping poor countries in places in sub-Saharan Africa to lift millions of people out of poverty? The second is, I'm a teacher, and most of the things we do a lot in basic economics, and there are generations of students who go through this, is profit maximization, consumer theory. It's all about maximizing your utility, and the standard textbooks are all within that mindset. So how does economics as a science also needs to do its own aggiornamento to adapt to the reality of climate change? Thank you.
Thank you.
So, you know, in the year of soil, we did a manifesto called Terra Viva, linking the issues of land degradation, desertification, and the refugee crisis. But in the process, I took the SDGs, because that's the year they were put out, and showed how every step you take to regenerate the soil addresses the SDGs, each SDG. And years later, I was working with the government of Sikkim, which had declared itself 100% organic. And they had called me for a biodiversity conservation conference, and we did the same exercise. So every right action in itself addresses the true ends for the SDGs. As I said, growth is a misconcept because it basically came out of mobilizing for war. That's what and it should have been put away when the wars were over. But it did become, you know, the arms industry is a very powerful driver of our economies. And once they got used to making money during wars, they're not going to give it up, just like the chemical industry got used to making money during wars, we're not going to give it up. The first issue on growth is, there's a brilliant book written by the education minister of Italy, whom I advise on sustainability. It's called The Most Powerful Number, GDP, the Most Powerful Number. Very interesting book to read. But there are huge questionings of growth right now. I remember Sarkozy, when he was PM, organized a discussion, and then all the Nobel laureates in economics said it's a meaningless term. It's not telling you anything about what's happening in the real world. And the government of Bhutan, whom I work with, they did, you know, the king, before there was a democracy created, the king said, he was asked, because he was attending the big meeting of the non-aligned movement, and he was asked, oh, you now open up to the world, what kind of development do you want? And he said, definitely not the kind of development where people are depressed in the West and there's so much violence in society. I'm not going to chase growth in GDP. I'm going to create gross national happiness for my people, which is what they've done. And they measure their planning commission is a happiness commission. And this issue of happiness and well-being is being taken over. But it's only coming back to the original meaning of the term. Wealth never meant money. Wealth meant the state of well-being. So these larger questions of how we live on the earth, and if we live on the earth in the future, can be merged with the revisiting of economic terms, including revisiting economy. As I said, economia is the art of living. And the art of money-making and profits is chrematistics. It's not economy. Economy is derived from oikos. Oikos is our home. The science of our home is ecology. The management of that home is economy. The day we start mismanaging our home because of the constructions of chrematistics, we got to throw it out.
Does that answer both questions? Yeah, okay, great. So I'll take you as third, and then, yep.
Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. I wanted to ask you, you are talking about that we need to go back to embrace complexity and that we are living in a disenchanted world now. So I wanted to ask you, what point of time in human civilization was like close to what we want, to have like this a good future and an environment where we can prosper, in which we can be wealthy, well-being? What point of time was it that we want to aspire to again? And can we live in this globalized world with these interconnections? Can we still have what we have today, or do we need to go back and simplify?
So actually, in the beginning of my talk, I did go through the breaks, both in terms of our relationship with the earth, as well as our humanity and our full potential. Colonialism was a big part of it. But the fossil fuel age, the fossil fuel industrialism was the second big part of it. A lot of the narrative that is repeatedly told in history as told in the West is England became a superpower because of technology. But if you look at the history of England and the creation of the East India Company when it colonized the world, it was 200 years of the Cotton Empire, where they colonized India through violence. They captured slaves in Africa, shipped them to America. In America, they captured the land of the indigenous people, and between the Spaniards and the British, exterminated 90% of the indigenous people. That's really the defining moment of the road to destruction. Interestingly, when the GATT was created, I just went back to history and I realized the first free trade agreement was actually signed by the East India Company through a bribe with a collapsing Mughal Empire. They gave a bribe to a clerk. And it was called the Free Trade Agreement between the Right Honorable East India Company and Farrukhshid, who was kind of one of the last few declining emperors. So the notion of globalization as inevitable in the current time means both knowing exactly how these rules came to be. There's nothing natural about them. In my areas, I've looked very closely. The intellectual property agreement was written by Monsanto. They said, we are the patient, physician all in one, and diagnostician all in one. Cargill wrote the agreement on agriculture. They were deputed. They became the US representative. The biggest grain trading company of the world became US negotiator. And the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement was written by Nestle, Pepsi, and Coke. So we definitely have to start taking away this naturalness of globalization, especially in this time where there's even more confusion, a new confusion being created between the empty rhetoric of nationalism, which is in effect cultural nationalism, but further decay in economic sovereignty. So Gandhi had a very beautiful word. And again, he didn't create it, he derived it. When the British were making a mess, these movements of we'll make our own cloth, why should we be dependent on the British? It was called Swadeshi, self-making. And for me, anything that's artistic and, is about self-making. He had another word called Swaraj. Now, the word of self-organization that in science is referred to as autopoiesis, your own creativity, its equivalent politically is Swaraj, self-governance. And this is going to be more and more important because right now in India, they want a national register and criminalize everyone. India's burning. Vehicles are being burned, people are protesting, like you saw in Chile and you saw in Lebanon, etc. It's happening, it just doesn't reach the international press. I think the two guiding factors for us is one, celebrating our, if you think of patriarchy, what was it? Escape from the body. No? Control over women's body and escape from your own. But that's what Descartes wrote. Got to escape from this very distracting body that creates doubt. So we got to celebrate our earthiness. And through our body, the relationships with the rest. And that also means reclaiming our hands, because the fossil fuel age said anything with the hand is either impure, dangerous, or inefficient. The economic definitions, I talked about the agriculture definitions, fake. I think we got to reclaim the creativity of our hands. And the day our hands become center stage instead of fossil fuels, we'll shape another society.
Your question, and then after that, one more, I think the last one, and then, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel so blessed to be in your companion and to listen to you. And it's not really a question, but really something for us to think together here, I guess. In 2014, I'm Brazilian, and I was doing research on the possible relationships between agroecology and art, visiting food forests and agroforestry movements. But I also understood that I had to see what the food forest was not. So I decided to go visit a monoculture of bananas. And the farmer was very happy showing me around, very proud of what he did. And it was mountains of monoculture of banana. And after visiting, we went back to his house. And he showed me his orchard, his backyard orchard, where there were lemon trees, orange trees, and banana trees, which were not sprayed, by the way. His monoculture was sprayed, and there was use of heavy machinery. And with a smile in his face, and very naturally, he said that his family did not have any bananas from the monoculture, only from the backyard. The monoculture was his business. That was food as a commodity. And in his backyard, it was more like agriculture. It was not a business. So that was like really the food being a mediator in his relationship to the land. And since I silenced, and I could not say anything. But somehow till today, every project I do and every class I give is somehow trying to address that image that became a trauma in a way. And I think your concept of the monoculture of the mind has been really helpful to address that, and through art and education, I think we have very important tools to address that. But at the same time, I'm not teaching this farmer, and I don't know if my projects, they're not getting to this farmer. There are separate worlds, right? That somehow, yeah, that's my what I'd like to share with you. Thank you.
But they can't be separate worlds because it's already shaped you. And relationship doesn't mean becoming the same. You won't be a farmer. You'll be the artist you are. But if the reality of the farmer is informing you, your relationship has already been established. And I think talking about hope, while on the one hand, it's made to look like farmers don't know what they're doing, but all over the world, even I've seen this in India, even in the heart of Punjab, they'll have a little vegetable patch, or they'll grow their wheat without the poisons. And I think these backyard gardens are the future, and the feasibility. I mean, it wouldn't be a viable business for the farmer if it wasn't for the subsidies. Everything is subsidized. How does it make it? I've never understood this, and that's why so much of my recent work on the economics of all this is. You sell seeds with royalties. You extract huge amounts of money from the farmer. You sell costly chemicals. And because they are inefficient at doing their job, they create new pests. You have to use more pesticides. Your urea kills your soil organisms. You have to use more bags of urea to maintain the same level of output. You use more and more water. You have more and more climate havoc, so your crops fail more frequently. It's a very costly system of production. But at the end of it, on the shelves, you get cheap food. And as a production chain, for me,
it's magic.
High cost production and cheap food What is making it is the subsidies and monopolies, you know? And that is the piece that is kept hidden. And that's the piece where we have to, I want to show you, you know, you talked about the bananas. I shut down GMO banana coming to India on the claim that it would prevent women from dying in childbirth. Iron from bananas. We said, no, 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 no. We've got all of the iron-rich sources. They want a golden rice. We said, no, we've got all the vitamin A rich. We'll just do our gardens. So we've just done this analysis, and about 1 to 4% of the consumer payment reaches the farmer. This report of Our Daily Bread is also available on the website. In the case of Pepsi chips, well, this is something I watch in my country. A bag of 20 kilograms of potato, 5 rupees. And about 80 rupees is a euro. Can you imagine, huh? And by the time 20 grams of it are packed in a chips packet, it's 20 rupees. So our analysis showed that for this 20 rupee packet, 19.97 goes to Pepsi, 0.04 paisa goes to the farmer. This is the system that is shutting down farms. Farmers are not giving up farming. Farmers are being driven off their land. They are, I would say, they are ecological refugees. And I think those of you who could do a brilliant project connecting the uprooting of people from Africa and Syria with the destruction of their soil and they're becoming refugees, as well as farmers, not just as refugees, but small farmers as a threatened species. And the reason for me this is so important is only small farmers can regenerate the earth and her life capacity and produce real food and good food. The rest is the commodity production. And it is really now time to realize it's too important to be left to illusions and to reclaim it by applying the best of our creativity as economists, as scientists, as artists. And unleashing our creativity really is the demand of our times. It's not a luxury to be an artist.
Last question. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Well, we all have thanked you. Thank you. I'm an artist, and I started the project I Can Change the World with My Two Hands in Amsterdam in 2011. And I felt quite alone as an artist. So people always questioned me, so do you still have time for your artwork? And I said, this is my artwork. This is too important. So what I also noticed in the art world is that people stay in the mind. So it's a lot thinking and not enough doing. So I would like to ask you to give me some power, some words to give back to people that keep questioning me. Oh, and what's your art?
Thank you.
That's a challenge you'll have to take up for yourself, yeah? But, you know, when I realized that here was all this work that I was doing off time, in holidays and vacations, that was actually stopping mining in valleys, stopping dams, stopping logging. And in the academics, you know, it's sadly, I mean, this poor Bacon created such a bad tradition. Because the more you separate yourself from nature and society, the more authentic your discipline is supposed to become, because it's based on separation. And that's when I left academic life and opened the Research Foundation from my mother's cowshed. And said, I'm now going to work with communities and I'm going to work for nature. And I will not wait for anyone to tell me and judge me. I will let the conscious be my guide. Then my conscience and my relationships are the place to guide you. Because of the kind of sociology of hierarchies we've created and divisions we've created, if we keep waiting within those hierarchies to get affirmation for living through a transition in an emergency, we'll never get it. So you have to look for like-minded people, maybe from different disciplines. Create communities of creativity and solidarity. Because in good times, like I always say, in good times, you can leave it all to the state. Because the state takes care of you. It's a welfare state. But when you have a fascist state, you can't leave it to them. You got to start reclaiming democracy. In the same case for everyone, no matter who they are and what they are. It could be a farmer, it could be an artist, it could be scientist, it could be an economist. Every vocation is in turmoil. And I think we owe it to the world and ourselves to take the best of our learning and turn it into bridges into the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva.
Thank you.
I would like to give you a work of Mieke van Boom. She was an artist here, and she lives in Scotland on an island. It is one in a series. It's in a limited edition of seaweed. Seaweed. Yeah, it's a 2-meter high work, so we might not want to take it out. It's one of those beautiful examples of a beautiful work that is related to the nature that she lives in, and printed here in our famous print and publishing lab, which attempts to work as energy efficient and climate friendly as possible. So, yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful. I'm sorry? I can mail it to you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for being here. It's a wonderful, inspiring moment, and I'm quite energetic now to walk out the door and start. So thank you. Well, go for it. Thank you. Wow. That was so beautiful. I just want to say a quick person.
Oh.